The one thing that leaders did to create space for brilliant work in a very busy and distracting world was they were really great at slowing things down. They knew when to tap the brakes. They didn't go slow for the sake of going slow, but they went slower at times so people could actually go faster.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age. From the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. My name is Simon Brown, and today I'm here with my co-author Garrick Jones.
Hello.
Unfortunately, we don't have Paul today, but we are thrilled today to be joined by Shawn Vanderhoven. So Shawn is a partner at the Wiseman Group, where he leads executive development for senior leaders and rising talent, and he helps organizations build what he calls an intelligence culture. He's also a collaborator on the New York Times bestseller Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. And he's also author of the upcoming book Pause, How to Lead Brilliant Work in a Busy World. So I think there's going to be lots we can learn from you, Shawn. He's worked with global brands, including Apple, Microsoft, Deloitte, and LinkedIn. And earlier in his career, he helped scale his family's software business 30-fold. So lots we'd like to hear about that as well, I'm sure. So warm welcome, Shawn, to the Curious Advantage podcast.
Hey, glad to be on here with the both of you. It's an honor.
It's great to have you. Maybe let's start where we always do, on the topic of curiosity. So when you think of curiosity, how do you define it? And what's sort of the definition that's evolved through your work with senior leaders of how you sort of think about curiosity?
You know, I've got a funny relationship with curiosity because I want to admit that early in my career as a leader, I wasn't very curious at all. And I remember, we can get into it later, but I remember when I really learned that. It was a bit of a painful experience. But what I learned about curiosity is leaders who are curious about what other people can do, what they're thinking, what they're capable of, they just lead in a way where they're constantly asking questions. They're creating space for people to step up and play bigger. They're figuring out how they can give people more responsibility and how they can draw out their very best thinking in those responsibilities. And, you know, it's like we've all worked for that leader who, you know, they really want to know what you have to say. And we've all worked for the leader who you're pretty sure they don't want to know what you have to say. And so I'd say that curiosity just manifests itself in this cross section between lots of questions and then also space, a stage, if you will, where they are trying to draw out what you might create. And that's a thrill. That's an exciting proposition to work for somebody that's curious that way.
I'm interested in how you relate that to the idea that you have of building an intelligence culture. I mean, what is that, and where does curiosity fit in with that, Shawn?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of how do you build an environment where you're accessing everybody's best thinking, just the underlying notion of wanting to build a place where everybody can, where you are accessing people's best thinking rather, is that first of all, that people are smart, that they've got loads to contribute, that they can figure things out. And so I think the question is how do you lead in a way and work together where that intelligence, not only is it always coming, but it's also being amplified, and you're pressing on it as well to be able to see, you know, in any challenge, right? I mean, you know how it is. You work for people. If you give them a good challenge, people want to go to work. They want to do something big. You know, it's like if you look back at the end of your year and if somebody asks you what you're proud of, almost always we'll go to something that was difficult that we worked through and that we recognized that it wasn't a foregone conclusion that we would do that thing, but we did it anyways. And we're excited about how our capability and our intelligence came out in that project to make that thing happen. And I think that that's the essence of building an intelligence culture, is that you're building a space, if you will, where through curiosity, you can access people's very best thinking. You can challenge them to do something interesting and useful with that thinking. And that the system itself draws that out of people. So, you know, you're not leaving anything on the table, so to say, and that's just in the water.
I would imagine everyone listening is thinking, well, that's of course what I want to. I want my team to bring out their best thinking. I want to create that atmosphere, but I guess it's not as easy as all of that. So through your research for multipliers, what can leaders actually do in practice to create that rather than maybe sort of shutting it down or blocking it or just not encouraging it?
It's a good question, and I've got to give so Liz, she's the primary author on multipliers. She started this idea with this observation that there were leaders who shut people down versus these leaders who were these multipliers that access people's capability. But somewhere along there in the journey, there was a realization that most people are a little bit of both, of course. We have these moments where we show up as multipliers and we get people's best thinking. And then maybe even in just the next meeting or maybe even the next moment, we don't realize it, but sometimes we shut people down. And most of the leaders that are diminishing people aren't these headline grabbing narcissists. They're actually just well-intended. And so you have a talented individual. If you think about this career path, you have a very talented individual who does great work. They are promoted for that great work. And then as a leader, they continue to lean on their ability to get things done. Totally sensible way to approach that. However, the things that you do as a contributor, whatever that is, maybe you're a great writer, maybe you're great at negotiating. When you start to lead other people, it's like being a coach in a sport. Like, you can no longer take the pitch. You've got to stay on the sideline. But it's not that clear in knowledge work. It's so easy to continue to take the pitch. So for example, if I'm a writer, it's easy for me to rewrite that person's piece, or it's easy to raise my hand for the tough ones. Not because I don't think anybody else can do it, but just because I've been around the block and maybe it'd be better for me to take that challenging piece of work on. And so what we've learned is that the things that you do to get promoted into management oftentimes are the very things, the strengths that sometimes show up as a leadership liability. So contributor strength, leadership liability. Like, for example, as a contributor, you were rewarded to save the day. Things started to go south. Everybody knew you'd step in, you'd get the project back on track, you'd rescue the project, if you will. But if you're a leader and somebody's struggling and you rush in and rescue them from their challenge, and maybe too early and too often, well, what happens?
Yeah, you stop them from actually getting the experience and learning from it. Yeah.
And so what we found is that what the very first things that leaders can do to kind of make this shift from maybe a would-be accidental diminisher to an intentional multiplier is to become aware. This is the number one thing. It's to become aware of how are your strengths as a leader. If maybe you're full of ideas, or you tend to protect people from challenge, or you're quick to respond, you're rapid in your responses. So somebody sends an email in and you're like, 2 minutes later, you're always responding. These we call the accidental diminishing tendencies. If you can become aware of how your strengths and your tendencies show up in a way that are making it difficult for people to show up and play their biggest, just by becoming aware of it, you can start to tweak your behaviors just a little bit to make sure that you create the necessary space for other people to show up and play really big.
Which is really interesting because everyone's busy, everyone sort of has more than they can do. But actually in those situations, by doing less, you're actually creating a better situation. So yeah, that, I've got to respond, I've got to come in, I've got to save the day on it, creates workload. Actually stopping, pausing, leaving it and letting someone else pick it up is giving someone else the chance to do it, to take on that responsibility. And yeah, so actually it's a win-win all round by pausing and letting someone learn from their own challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's just play a little game. So I'll just name a few accidental diminishing tendencies, and you both kind of like self-indict, if you will. Okay, so there's the idea fountain, the leader who's full of ideas. They can't shut it off. If you bring a problem to them, you're gonna get loads of ideas on how to solve that problem. Or there's the leader who's always on.
Yep.
They can't turn it off. They're thinking all of the time. They have a tendency, without meaning to, but kind of sucks the air out of the room, just because there's so much to contribute. There's so much to do. There's the rapid responder, the leader that's responding to everything at light speed. And that makes it difficult for other people to feel like they can wait. So then it shuts down like the incubation time that you can have for a response, because that your leader's responding so quickly, and then everybody feels like they've got to respond that fast, or they just kind of know, that's come in 5 minutes ago. They're getting ready to press send, so they stop trying. There's the strategist. This is the leader who's thinking big ideas all the time, break through the next level of success. You can see this in yourself. And so when that leader's thinking, well, they're talking about the big idea all the time and how to break through to that 10x accomplishment. But what happens for those that they're not wired that way? Well, they start to think, well, maybe they can't see the bigger picture. So they just defer to their boss's thinking. Or there's the perfectionist, the leader who just can't help but correct things. They're going to correct a little bit of everything. You turn something in, you're going to get
typo on page 30 that you missed in the yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And so, you're going to get feedback all the time. People that work for perfectionists, that can make it to where either you give up at 80% because you know that your leader's going to finish the work anyways, or you do 120% all the time and you lose the ability to discern when good is good enough. So think about these. I mean, if you can see which of these you do in yourself. So, you raised your hand on a few of those. As soon as you're aware of it, you can start to ask people, hey, when I go into strategist mode and it feels like I'm just talking big picture all the time and I'm not really getting your thinking on how you see your part connectedness or whatever. Hey, could you just give me one of these? Or you should have saying now all of a sudden you can work with people to help them have this conversation with you. That is impossible without it.
It's true. It reminds me so much of I come out of a research background, and that was where I got a lot of my kudos, if you like, from research and knowing the answers and going deep and so on. And what I had to learn was that the truth is one thing, or the research data is one thing, but actually it's more important to stop and to allow other people to participate and not to be totally obsessed with what the right answer is, and sometimes allow everybody to participate so that we come to an answer together. That was a huge shift for me. And what it reminds me of is when you're talking about creating the environment and the space and the pause, which allows other people to fill that pause rather than me jumping in with the answer the whole time. And I know that annoyed people who worked for me for sure. Took a long time to learn that. But the other thing it reminds me of, I'm smiling, is because do you remember the television program Ted Lasso?
Yeah, right.
I mean, there's so much to learn from Ted, who's a normal guy going through hell. He's got a divorce situation. He's got kids who are not behaving. He's in a foreign country. He's coaching outside of his experience in a different sport, and yet he finds a way to focus on the human, which is what gets the great results. And there's something about the way he behaves in the locker room with the team and allows them to shine individually, mostly because he doesn't have the resources anymore. He's so busy trying to cope with his own life. So he just lets them get on with it. And that's where the success comes from in some respects. This is why, Pause, it's such a brilliant title. How did you come up with the term pause, and how did you get to why this is so important in today's always-on world?
Let me hit that in 1 second. I just want to comment something you just said there. I think it's really interesting, this idea and what the writers did in Ted Lasso. He was aware of the fact that he just didn't know soccer. And this has a tendency to make it to where we play a little smaller and allow other people to play bigger. And maybe the dangers for me in my career, you two see if you see this, is when you really know the territory. That's when it's so easy to show up as one of these unintentional, accidental diminishers where it's just comes so naturally to the territory so well that you're just happy to give the answers or to give people the guidance or fix the problem or, and the more sure you are of yourself, the harder it is to be aware of how you are over contributing and just not leaving space for other people to play bigger. And I think that is what's so brilliant about that piece that is written is that, of course, he just didn't know. And so this creates this humility. And with that comes some curiosity that provides this stage, if you will, for other people to play their role and to play big. Oh, but my problem is when I know the answer. It's when I'm so familiar with the idea that I just can't even see how I'm taking the stage. I'm not even obsessed with the answers because I'm just sure that I have the answers in those scenarios. And so it might just be a warning for all of us. If you're leaving this scenario where you are the expert, oh my gosh, it's more likely that you will be diminishing others than multiplying others, just because it kind of goes with the territory of familiarity and confidence. Those two things can really be a tough combination for us as leaders, because we're just not going to naturally be pulled into a place of curiosity.
And particularly where you couple that with what you were saying earlier, where if you're the expert practitioner, you've been promoted into the leading the team, maybe a period of time has gone past. What you did to make you successful, particularly with the speed the world is moving today, may not be the thing that's needed anymore. But if you go back on well, that's what I did and that made me successful, so we should do that again, actually can be hugely harmful, because the world has changed and you're relying on what you did previously.
You're describing my everyday life, Simon. I built a career based on stuff we did 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and that's lasted a long time. But with the whole AI revolution and everything else that's been going on, I really don't know the answers to how do you get collaborative decision making going on, for example, in the new world. We haven't figured that out.
Yeah, no, it's right. Okay, so Garrett, I can go to this other question now you asked about where did this idea of pause come from? Well, there was this observation that we had in studies that we were doing, that people were losing, leaders and individuals felt like that they were losing their very best work to distraction and to burnout. And they couldn't get deep into their projects. They found themselves going in and out of things so quickly. I don't know that AI has made this any better. I think that this is in some ways made it a little worse. And so the question that we had was, man, how do you lead in a way so people don't lose their very best thinking to all the distractions and then feel this sense of burnout? And so with that question, we started to run interviews for people, exploring what had leaders done for them that made it possible for them to get deeper into their work, have more time in a flow state, feel like that was, not just welcomed on those teams, but encouraged, even protected, if you will. And then also what we needed to see the opposite. What do leaders do? What do they think? And what do they do that makes it almost impossible to get into a place of clarity and focus in a piece of work? And so that's where we started, as we ended up interviewing, well over almost 400 people, and searching through their eyes, what did their leaders do who gave them that space for deep focus versus those who just made the craziness that was already in the water much worse. And the news in the research was the one thing that leaders did to create space for brilliant work in a very busy and distracting world was they were really great at slowing things down. They knew when to tap the brakes. They didn't go slow for the sake of going slow, but they went slower at times so people could actually go faster. They could get in deeper. They could have, more compound interest in their work, if you will. And, which you wouldn't be surprised, the leaders who made it worse, this always-on world, hyper-connected, was this pressure to always be going as fast as you possibly could. So people communicated that they always had more than they could do, that they were overcommitted, that they felt like that they were going so quickly, they were barely hanging on, they weren't able to get deep in their work, et cetera, et cetera. And you know how this goes. And so we realized, well, there's news here, that the art of the pause, slowing things down so people can go faster. If leaders do that, it makes a massive difference in the amount of brilliant work that you're going to get from the people that you're leading.
So it's sort of counterintuitive that by stopping, I actually go, or by slowing down, I actually go faster. Say more on what those 400 interviews discovered. So was it my assumption, which may be wrong, would be, by stopping and thinking about it, I actually get the clarity that, I don't need to do all of these things, or actually here's the answer here, and it saves me a whole bunch of time. What was the finding of why that pause was so important?
Well, it came with a mindset that was quite different between these two sets of leaders. One leader, let's take those leaders that tended to amp up distraction. They had this belief, we have to go fast and we have to do it all. And when you combine those two, you kind of get this bias towards activity, action, where you're doing, you're going, you're an opportunity presents itself, you go for it. As things are coming in, you quickly delegate those things. You're moving at such a click that it's difficult to recognize what's going on with your team members. It's difficult to recognize how clear things are for people. You're not really probably slowing down to clarify what does a real priority look like? How will we know when we've been successful? What's the best strategy for us to get there? There's not a lot of collaborative work on making trade-offs. Like a lot of times people would say, well, trade-offs. There were no trade-offs. You just did it. You were just told to do it. And so there's very little discussion about trade-offs. It feels like there's no buffer where, you've got, space to go, disconnect for 3 or 4 hours to work on something, and that will be okay. And then as well, not only were there not buffers that people felt, they didn't feel seen. And so when your leader's going so quickly all of the time and you're struggling, it's pretty difficult to raise your hand. It's like trying to stop a leader that's running sprints on, on a field. You're not going to have a conversation when they're running sprints. And so they communicated to us that they felt like that the leader couldn't see them when they were struggling. If there was a failure that they made, there was no time to like learn from the failure. Instead, maybe more a little bit of blame and punishment when you're going quick and you've got to get results fast. And so there was these kind of three broad strokes. So there was this belief, this bias towards action. We've got to go fast. And then there was very little work on clarifying what does matter here of all the things that we could be doing. There was very little buffering. There was very little space to get deep into something as a result of this mindset and these set of behaviors. And then also it was difficult to communicate the things that you were suffering with, that you were unsure about, that you were, failures that you were struggling with. Okay, so this was on the one side, this bias towards action. These other leaders that had this exact opposite result, they were these leaders that had mastered the pause, if you will. There's this great quote we found when we were doing the research that Shakespeare said. He says, make pause in your haste. And that's what these leaders had the ability to do. There was still an intensity about them, a high standard, a desire to move projects along fast, but they just approached it in this different way. So they believed that you can't do it all, and people need space to do great work. And that leads to this thing that we came to call the bias towards impact. So still a deep desire for action, but action for a result. And you kind of need the opposite thing a lot of times with the people you're leading. You almost need to have them to have a bias towards action. So they're experimenting, they're working through things. But as a leader, if you're not really thinking through what are the few things that we can do to have an impact, then you just tend not to look for those little moments naturally to slow things down. And so in contrast, these leaders were brilliant at clarifying what success looked like. They were very good at working with their team, harnessing their brain power to make trade-off decisions. They understood kind of the things about themselves that tended to get them into trouble, like the rapid responder that we talked about earlier, where maybe they weren't creating space. And so with this little bit of awareness, especially in digital communication, they tended to create more space instead of take it away. And then finally, one of my favorite practices in the book, well, there's two I'll share real fast that we in the research, was one, they're really good at slowing things down when they delegate. So I'll just give you an example. So we had this one practice in the book called tune in before you jump in. Well, the leader who just gets something from senior management, they just jump right in. They just give it to you right away. They're not really aware of what you've got on your plate. Whereas the leader who tunes in, let's say that, Simon, you give me a task for my team. It's going to be a multi-person task. I can't take it on my own, so I'm going to have to do some delegating. Instead of rushing to my team, I go and I do a split step. I go to my teammates and I start with questions. Hey, what do you got on your plate? Let's talk about who wants this thing that I have and why they want it. If we were to do this thing, what would you have to say no to? So they would do this little tune-in. It was just a few minutes to make sure they understood what was going on. What did that person already have on their plate? What was the project they were working on? How did that compare in value to this new thing that I was, showing up to give them? And this little tune-in, these little trade-off conversations before making little pivots, gave people to kind of make the additional pivot, if you will. They just slowed things down for a moment. And that made it possible for them to be able to get kind of clarity to make a better decision. Another thing that they did was they were very good at recognizing when somebody would struggle and when they would see somebody struggling. There's this other practice that we called, they cleared their desk. They knew when it was time to close the laptop, to turn the phone over, and just kind of, let's get into what's going on for you. What's the challenge here? Let me make sure that I've seen you, that I've listened to you, I've downloaded. They were mindful, if you will, of what was going on with others.
You're listening to the Curious Advantage podcast, inspired by the book The Curious Advantage, written by Paul Ashcroft, Simon Brown, and Garrick Jones. Subscribe to the podcast today.
I love the fact that you refer to Shakespeare. How did this dude know 400 years ago
Seriously.
so many of these axioms that are irrelevant today? I mean, what a life. I mean, this is axiomatic. You have to slow down in order to speed up. It's remarkable. It's so simple, and yet it's so profound. You were talking about why we follow certain leaders. And what are you discovering about what actually makes people choose to follow? And where would you say curiosity fits in with that?
Well, I think one thing to be sure is what we see in the data is when people believe that their leader really is interested in what they have to say, they're not just kind of playing games. They're going to ask you a question. They're going to stop. They're going to create space.
Authenticity, the authentic.
Yeah, they will expect you to respond.
Yeah.
And they use your work. That not only in that space that they ask you to fill, when you fill it, they use the best work that you have. And then if there's work that they would love for you to see improve, they tell you, hey, like, I want to use this, but you're going to have to improve it to meet this standard. So there's a challenge in it for us. We like that. We all thrive on challenge. So we're invited to step up and play at the next level, but we're given the space to do that and the coaching when we fall short. People want to follow that kind of curious leader. There was this great quote from C.K. Prahalad, who was we lost him to cancer unfortunately years ago, but he ended his career as a professor at the business school in Michigan, the University of Michigan. And he said that he thought that the skill for leading in the 21st century isn't what you know, but how you access other people's intelligence. How do you access what other people know? And I think that skill, that capability, which is born of the assumption that people are smart, and then developed in this way where you give people space, you challenge them in that space, and then you use their work. You hold them accountable for getting things done. I think that that's what we want from a leader. We want that space to step up and play bigger. We know that they will be asking us for our point of view and for our contributions. And if we don't contribute or if we don't share a point of view, they're going to want to know why. Hey, why are you so silent on this? You know what I mean? It's because there's genuine intellectual curiosity, talent curiosity, if you will, on what it is that you will create and bring to the table. And so then when it doesn't show up, it's like an obvious person to the party that didn't show. There's a mission chair at the table. And the question is, well, wait a minute, like, where is this contribution from you? I need this from you. You know, and actually it's been this way for me working with Liz. You know, not only did she find the idea in the research, she really leads this way. There was a time when we were working on the second edition of Multipliers, I was doing some research for the final chapter of the book. We were going out to, literally like 150 clients on how had they successfully implemented the concept of multipliers among their leaders and where had they tried but failed. We just wanted to gain the insights on how could we pass on the wisdom from both, those that tried but failed and those that tried and were successful. How could we pass that on to future readers? I'd been working on this piece for 3 weeks and had really been pulling some long hours. I sent it to Liz. It was pretty late at night, 9:00 in the evening, and I was getting ready to wrap up and go to bed. I sent this off to Liz. About 10:00, I'm getting ready to climb into bed. I check it. I know she was on the East Coast. She happened to send an email back, and she said, "Hey, Shawn, I don't have time to tell you why, other than a few anecdotes, but I can't use this research. I've got to present in the morning, and then I've got to send this off to the publisher by X time." It was that next day. I don't know what to do about it, but if you have any ideas on how you can solve this problem, she gave me kind of a vague direction to look. I'd love it, but I understand if you can't. This is 10:00 now p.m. And I think to myself, man, there's a challenge in this. Like, she doesn't want me to lose all this work, but she's also telling me that I haven't met the standard. And she's kind of given me an idea on how to go about it. So I get out of bed. My office at the time was on the porch. And I got I had these mittens that I'd put on and then pull the hand pieces up. I never worked late at night, right? So I go out on the porch. I live in Menlo Park, California, so don't worry. It was November, but it wasn't that cold. It was only like 40. And so I go out and I worked until the sun came up. And then I sent her the file 1 minute before she said that she could take a look at it. She sends an email response back. "This is brilliant. I can use it." And she did. It ended up going in the book. And if you read chapter 9 of Multipliers, the second edition, you'll see all of that work. But let me tell you why that was special for me as a contributor. It was because even when I failed, like, she would tell me, like, "Hey, look, I really want to use this material, but it's got to meet this standard. Here's how you may fix this." And most of the time she would have more time to coach me through it. But then she would say, like, "Listen, You have to choose to step up into this challenge, but if you do, I will use your work. And that has had a massive multiplying effect on me. The combination of space to create with the challenge to do it. And then always my work is used. Good work is used. Poor work is sent back and is upgraded. And it's really made it to where I've wanted to be that same kind of leader where I'm super curious about what people can accomplish. I create the space for them to do that work and challenge them to do maybe something a little bit outside of their comfort zone. That's where we learn, right? So they can lean into that.
Maybe as we're coming towards the end, but as a practical piece for a leader who's sort of sitting there thinking, well, pausing sounds great, but I look at my diary and it's, back to back and, how am I going to pause? So what are some practical tips that you've seen from your research in how people can actually make that pause happen, whether that's practical bits like in the diary or whether that's a mindset piece of actually motivating oneself to stop and actually make that pause?
It's a good question. So maybe we'll hit both. So leaders who pause will schedule a little bit of time to listen to all their team members. They rarely leave that to chance. So it's on their diary, if you will, even if it's very short blocks where maybe they're going to ask a couple questions and listen for 10 minutes, depending on how many people that you're working with. Maybe it's not a once a week, maybe it's once a month, but they don't leave listening to chance. And so you can schedule that, afford some time for that. And that saves problems in the long run. Another little practical thing that they can do is they spend a few minutes thinking about what failure looks like. And this is important. If you just take right now, if both of you wrote down your top 3 projects, the things that matter the most to you this year, it won't be hard for you to get that on paper. Even if you're not sure which of those 3 are the most important, you can write down the top 3 projects you have. And then if right next to that in a column you write out, okay, what might, who's going to be working on this team and what might failure look like? You've been around the block. And as a leader, a lot of times we have a sense on kind of where some failure can be. And you simply communicate, hey, I think that we could have these failures. Let's just watch for these and work with them as they come. All of a sudden now you've just slowed things down for just a second. And now you've given people a chance to be able to slow down with you, to be able to figure out how we can deal with some of the failures that will occur and that we can anticipate. So there's just another little, very small practical thing that can be done. On the prioritization side of the house, this is something that we found to be ubiquitous. Leaders who were very good at pausing, they programmed time to talk through what of the many things were the number one priority. And they spent time both trying to select what the priorities were and defining the value proposition. Why is this the thing that we're going to go after? Why would we go after this versus that, for example? They spend their time trying to pick what we call the priority targets, to define for the team, these are the priority targets that we're going to go after. And what that does is that actually speeds things up as the new pieces of work come. It's much easier to sort things into their houses, if you will, if you've really clarified up front what are the things that you are going for example, this month, this quarter, this year. And it's clear to everyone what those things are and why those things are the priorities. Listen, I tell you what, that was the kind of the surprise for me out of the research is that almost always people that felt like that they were overwhelmed and overcommitted and that they were burning out, the thing that they said that was synonymous with that was, I'm not clear on like what matters and what doesn't. It's easy to take that for granted. And so many people are operating with this sense of, I don't know what matters and what does. So there's another little thing that you can do is just simply clarify what are the top 3 priorities. What does success look like in those areas? And to involve one's team with this to make sure that they know as well.
Shawn, so many great tips. Beyond your book Multipliers and your book Pause, beyond all of your current work, what's something you're generally curious about in your life right now?
I'm very curious about, in life, how to think from an intergenerational perspective. So I have 3 boys, 24, 22, and almost 21. And I'm just thinking about like, what's my role as they have become adults and as they're contributing to the world, and 2 of them have recently been married. How do I think about my role today, which I've never had more opportunities and exciting work to do. And that means it comes with a responsibility. It's busy, it's challenging, it's, for me to contribute. And so I'm thinking about what's my role in my current work, and then what's my duty to them and their families and people in that generation, to think what's my role to them from a leader's perspective, and also in my current role. from an intergenerational perspective. And then what's my responsibility to my parents, who I'm fortunate enough to still have both my parents right now. So I think I'm interested in this idea on, as we age, what is our intergenerational responsibility, and how do we show up well as we think about, those that are older than us, those people that we are responsible to contribute to now in our current work, and then those people that, we're trying to encourage to step up and take our place. I'm very interested in this. That probably might not be very interesting to everybody else, but I find myself in this situation and I want to do it well.
In a moment, I'll summarize and come back to you for sort of one key takeaway. But there's something you said at the beginning that I want to come back to first, which is you started out saying that you didn't used to be curious as a leader. So was there an aha moment where suddenly you was like, maybe this is the answer. I need to be more curious.
There was an aha moment, and I'm no longer embarrassed about it. I was initially, and you'll see when the lightning strikes why I was probably a little embarrassed, but here it was. I'm working in Germany, and we were living in this little town called Weinheim, right outside of, in the Rhine-Neckar Valley, right outside of Mannheim. I was the youngest on this team of, say, 30, many German engineers that were twice my work experience. We had a very large, complicated project that we were working on for the US government, and it was failing. I mean, it was bad. It was so bad that I was pulled into the VP's office, Thilo Oberheimer, and he said it said considerations, and I was a subcontractor working with Siemens, and I thought, I wonder what considerations he's going to give me. I had no idea that meant that he was going to ask me to give him considerations for my poor performance. So, I mean, I was just very young. I was probably 28, 29, leading in this position, and I was very excited to go home one evening to speak with a friend who was actually researching for Liz when she first started working on multipliers. So I remember speeding home up the A5 to our little place that we were renting in Weinheim. And I was thinking about on the way home how I was going to tell him what my plan was to fix this project. And we were the linchpin for like a $30 million project. And so I sped home, I got on the phone with this fella, and I started telling him about how I was going to fix the problem, and my colleagues were dense and they were slow and they had caused all these problems when I had this idea, and how I was going to rescue the project. And I'll never forget it. He said, well, actually, Shawn, it's interesting you say all that. Now, mind you, I'd just spoken for 30 minutes straight on how I was going to save the day. He's like, Shawn, considering who you're working with, he's like, one of the things that we found in this research is that the very best leaders use other people's intelligence to fix problems instead of trying to save the day on their own. I remember how I felt in that moment. I felt small, very small. And I saw in an instant, I saw how it was just me in the room. I could just see how I thought that my job as a leader was to have the answers, was to fix the schedule, was to know what features we should be working on, shouldn't be, was to tell the engineers, what their approach should be. Oh, I had gotten it all wrong. I didn't know what to do at the time. So I went back and met with my colleague, my counterpart that was, his name was Hartmut Becker. The only thing I could think to do was listen and ask questions. So I just said, hey, listen, I just would love to have you tell me all of the problems that you see and maybe even how you think we should sort this out. And I would just restate it, tell me more about this. And I was amazed at what I saw. So I went to the next person, Stefan on the team, and then the next person, and started to slowly draw out a picture. I'm like, whoa, like these people know how to solve these problems. And the problem is me. So we went from me trying to solve the problems and causing them to me working through others to fix the problems. And it was, I don't know, a year later, the project had completely turned around. It was a wild success. And it was not because of my intelligence. It was because of the talent we had on this team. I was just diminishing them all with this mindset that if it was going to be, it was up to me, and I needed to show how much I knew and tell them what to do. And that's how we would win. And I couldn't have been more wrong.
Such a powerful example. Yeah. So we've covered a lot. So we've gone through how do you build an environment where you can access the best thinking, where people are smart, and how do we amplify their intelligence, and how people appreciate a good challenge, that if it's something that's actually difficult and they can work through, then you get more from it. We went into how do we build that space via curiosity to access people's best thinking. Talked about the work that you've done with Liz on the book and how some leaders shut people down and that most people do a bit of both. And then you shared a series of types of leader. And I think Garrick and I recognise we probably are guilty of several of these. The idea fountain, the always-on leader, the rapid responder, the strategist. I think that one I'm particularly guilty of, and the perfectionist. And how, maybe just becoming aware of those, helps us to address them a bit. And then we talked about your new book, Pause, how actually the counterintuitive piece of actually slowing down, pausing, actually can help us to go faster. And how do we leave people so that people don't lose their best work? Love the Shakespeare example or quote of, make pause in your haste. I think there's something that we can take away from there. And then, how the people that we have, some people who have that bias to action, that there's little prioritization, that it's hard to communicate for people who are struggling with them. And then those who get it wrong recognize that we can't actually do it all. They make that space for people to have an impact, and they really clarify what success looks like and help people in really understanding what's there. And that we tune in before you jump in, even if it's just a moment to figure out, who actually wants this and who has the space for it, and who would or what would you be giving up if you did it. And then some really helpful practical tips. So scheduling the time to listen, ask a couple of questions and just pause and actually listen to people. Take a few minutes to think through and share what failure would actually look like so that we can discuss and address what that would be. And then actually put some programming time to walk through what is the top priority and make sure that there's that real clarity around what that is. And then we heard about what you're curious about of that intergenerational perspective, which with a 17 and a 19-year-old, I also share that curiosity. So we covered a lot. Any sort of one major takeaway from all of that you'd like to leave our listeners with, Shawn?
I would say that when you think about things from a multiplier perspective, if you get the sense that you have this tendency to overplay and that your strengths as a contributor show up as a bit of a leadership liability and you might be accidentally diminishing others, the place to start is first and foremost is asking questions. If there's a superpower that we found among multipliers, and of course it's just right for what you all are doing on this podcast, it is to be curious. It's to use questions as the way to help you pause, to slow down. If you're concerned about things before a meeting, you can sit down and write out all of your concerns and then rewrite them as a question. So instead of going in and telling your team what's all the things you're concerned about, you can ask questions, sharing what you're concerned about so they can respond. I mean, you can tell people what you're expecting in a question. What's the best way for us to get this done by next Thursday? It instead of just walking into a room telling people, hey, we got to get this done by Thursday. So I really have learned in this multipliers work that if you spend a little bit more time thinking about what questions to ask, sharing your concerns in questions, sharing what needs to get done in questions, asking people what questions you should be asking, this has a natural pausing effect. And that kind of curiosity creates an environment that people love to work in. So I'd say that this is kind of like the superpower to lead where you are creating an intelligence culture. If you make pause in your haste, in that pause, you can be writing out the questions you should be asking. And I think that's just maybe the one thing that we can all rely on, and you will get much better thinking from everybody that you lead.
You've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. This series is about how individuals and organizations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and businesses, especially in the context of our new digital reality. It brings to life the latest understanding from neuroscience, anthropology, history, business, and behaviorism about curiosity and makes these useful for everyone. As always, we're curious to hear from you, so if you think there was something useful or valuable from this conversation, do write a review or share the podcast with someone that you think would find it valuable. And we always appreciate hearing your thoughts and having a curious conversation using the hashtag #CuriousAdvantage. Check out the Curious Advantage book on Amazon worldwide and do subscribe today to keep exploring curiously. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast. The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon. Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Jessica Wickham.